Senator Lieberman, you know that the most important issue, most probably for Iranian people and for Iran currently, is the nuclear program.
Yes.
And the impact it has on the lives of Iranian people. Iran is currently under tough sanctions. There's talk of war here and there. And the negotiations have not led to any concrete result yet. So, as a first question, I wanted to ask you about the current approach of U.S. administration towards Iran. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, well, I'm supportive of the current approach of the United States administration toward Iran's nuclear weapons development program. I mean, we think there's evidence clear that not just from the U.S. but international United Nations agencies that the Iranian regime is building the capacity to build a nuclear weapon, many of them, and that if that happened, it would be threatening to the entire region and the entire world, based not on our speculation, but what the leaders of the current regime in Iran and Tehran have said. But we're trying very hard in every way we can through diplomacy and economic pressure to avoid the need for military action. But I regret to say that at this moment, as we talk, nothing that we have done has caused the regime in Tehran to alter its course on the nuclear development program at all. And so we're coming to a point where there's going to have to be, there'll only be two choices for not just the U.S. and Israel, but other countries. Will we simply sit back and let Iran become a nuclear power and destabilize the region and start a nuclear arms race in the Middle East? Or will we be compelled to take some military action to delay or destroy that program? I hope it doesn't come to that. Nobody in the U.S. is eager or wants to attack the nuclear facilities of Iran, but the American desire for peace has sometimes over our history been mistakenly interpreted as a sign of weakness. In this case, I think members of both parties politically in the United States and the American people want peace with Iran, but if Iran doesn't respond by altering its nuclear program, the prospects of U.S. military action are high.
So you mentioned the sanctions.
Yes.
You have been a supporter of tougher sanctions against Iran. How do you think the sanctions might change the course of Islamic Republic? We've had instances before in which the regime was put under sanctions, for instance, North Korea, Iraq, or Cuba even, but it hasn't led them to change their course.
Yeah.
How do you think, what do you think about the effectiveness of these sanctions against Iran?
So I really must be, totally honest with you, which is that economic sanctions have had mixed results. Probably the most successful use of economic sanctions to change a political situation and liberate a people against a repressive government was South Africa. But in other areas, they have had an effect, but not always clear, and sometimes, as in the case of Cuba.
But South Africa, again, it was a different issue as well. They had a right movement going on in the country. They had opposition inside the country, so it was not just the sanctions.
So look, the use of sanctions is adopted by countries like the United States because we don't want to do what might have happened in an earlier day, which is just to go to war against a country like Iran because it's developing nuclear weapons. You know, there's tremendous fear of Iran with nuclear weapons, not just in the United States and Israel, for instance, but throughout the Arab world and, of course, in Europe. So the sanctions, what was the hope that the sanctions would hurt the Iranian economy and perhaps create the kind of pressure from the people on the regime in Tehran to lead the regime to pull back from its total support of this nuclear weapons development program. That part I would say, unfortunately, has not had the result that we would want. And it pains me that average people, regular people in Iran, who are our friends, if you will, are being hurt by those sanctions. That's why a couple of years ago, a few of us in the Senate tried a new kind of sanction, which is to directly sanction people in the regime in Iran who are human rights violators. I mean, this is not, can't just be about the most immediate threat that worries the rest of the world, which is Iran's nuclear program. This is also about the fact that the current regime in Tehran is a totalitarian, repressive regime. And so the U.S. has sanctioned some of those individuals, tying up their financial assets, making it a bit harder for them to travel. I will say, frankly, that the European Union has actually sanctioned more people in the Iranian government than the U.S. has, which I'm very upset about, and I hope our administration will do that.
On the notion of sanctions, what you said is completely true. We posted on our Facebook page and asked our listeners to comment or ask their questions from you. And most of the people, tens of questions were posted, and a majority of them are saying that actually the sanctions are targeting people, that it's hurting their lives, it's not targeting the regime of Islamic Republic, exactly as you described. And about those sanctions against the individuals, human rights violators, as it's been defined, I have to say you that many of the critics of the regime are very happy with those sanctions. They say they're saying that it could be a very good move. But other people, there are some people who are criticizing the move, saying that it's just a gesture because most of these people do not have any assets overseas in the West. So they're a little bit questioning the they endorse the gesture, but they're questioning the effectiveness of the move. What do you think about that?
So from what we hear, this is an effective way. In other words, listen, I would invite your listeners and viewers to make suggestions about what better we can do. It pains me, as I said before, that some of the broader sanctions are hurting the people of Iran, because it's for the freedom of the people of Iran that we're trying to stop their government and change the repressive government. That's part of why we focus on the human rights violators in the government. Some of them do have assets abroad. Some of them want to travel abroad. And if not to the United States or in the United States, then in Europe. And the Europeans have been very strong about this. So I would say to people who have asked those questions, two things. One is, I do think the sanctions against the violators of human rights in the Iranian government are having an effect, a positive effect. The second is, if you can think of anything short of military action against the regime, well, against the nuclear weapons sites, please let us know, because we're doing all of these sanctions to try to convince the Iranian government to change its policy on nuclear weapons so we don't have to go to a military action.
Well, speaking of military action, Senator Lieberman, in February 2012, you co-sponsored a resolution urging action to prevent Iran from pushing, and I quote, forward in its pursuit of a nuclear weapons capability by rejecting any policy that would rely on containment of a nuclear weapons capable Iran. Now, as you're aware, there have been some different interpretations about the use of word capability. And for instance, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, former Chief of Staff for Secretary of State Colin Powell, said in a discussion in FCNL that this resolution reads like the same sheet of music that got us into the Iraq war and could be the precursor for a war with Iran. It's effectively a thinly disguised effort to bless war. So how do you interpret the word Iran's capability?
Yeah. There was one major focus of that resolution, and it was, if you will, a response to some thinking in the U.S. and in Europe that perhaps it wouldn't be so bad if Iran got nuclear weapons. that we could contain Iran and its nuclear weapons, and many of us in the U.S. Senate and many of our allies throughout the world felt that's a terrible mistake, because if this regime in Tehran has nuclear weapons capacity, it will, we believe, threaten the entire region around it, and may eventually threaten.
But what defines the word capable? It's rather a vague word.
Okay, so that's, I understand the focus on that, but I do want to say the main purpose of that resolution was to send a message to our government, the United States government, but also to the government in Tehran. The way this is going to end cannot be with you getting nuclear weapons. And it's to our government to say, don't begin to seriously consider this idea that we can live with a nuclear weapons Iran, because it will so change the security of the Middle East and Europe and the U.S., the world, that we have to prevent it. We can't contain it. The second part, lesser of importance in that resolution, but so I thought Mr. Wilkerson focused not on the most important part, was capability. And just to make a long story short, and it's hard to fully define the line here, but what the sponsors of the resolution were saying is that we can't, and again, we were sending a message to our government and to the regime in Tehran. It doesn't make any sense to wait until Iran actually has nuclear weapons to take military action. What we're saying is we have to be ready, if all else fails, economic sanctions, diplomacy, etc., to take action once Iran develops the capability to build a nuclear weapon. In other words, one possibility here, of course, Iran every day, not according to me, but according to the International Atomic Energy Agency, is building more centrifuges, enriching more nuclear fuel, and getting ready to break out. I mean, generally speaking, and this is publicly discussed matter, there is a conclusion that Iran, the regime, already has enough enriched fuel to build 5 nuclear weapons, relatively small, but nonetheless nuclear weapons. So that's what I'm saying. You can't, we're trying to say to the regime, don't think we're going to wait until you actually have nuclear weapons. If you don't come to the table, negotiate, and incidentally, I think the West has put a fair proposal on, if Iran wants civilian nuclear power capabilities, that can be worked out. Come into the community of nations, get rid of the sanctions, open up trade between our countries. I mean, that's what's in the interest of the people of Iran and the people of America. I mean, this is a great...
many of there are many mixed reactions in regards with military option in Iran. I read some of the comments and questions that our listeners have posted on the Facebook. Hatef, one of our listeners, says that the war condition only allows the Islamic Republic to expand its terror over the Iranian people and open its hands, and I quote, in murdering people. Ali Reza says on our Facebook page that a war would smash the people of Iran by putting them under further economic pressure. Moshtaba is saying that it is not easy. In case of an attack, Iran would retaliate, attacking U.S. allies, including Israel and Arab states. So, as you know, even in Israel, there's a strong debate going on between the former officials in Israel and the current administration, Benjamin Netanyahu's administration. They are even in Israel questioning his approach towards Iran. So how do you assess all this?
Well, these are difficult decisions for countries outside of Iran, the Arab world, Israel, the United States, Europe, about what to do as the Iranian regime plunges forward with its nuclear weapons development program. Because nobody really wants to go to war. and yet the stubbornness, the obstinacy of the regime in Iran may leave us with no other choice. My heart goes.
How about its effectiveness? Do you think it would be effective even in United States' favor?
I do. I think we have the capability to eliminate either to eliminate the Iranian nuclear weapons program, or to disable it in a way that it will be delayed for enough years that we may hope and pray that there'll be a regime change and that there'll be a more democratic and friendly regime. I mean, there's nothing that the people of the United States would like more than to have good relations with the people of Iran and the two governments working together. But if there is military action by anyone outside of Iran against Iran's nuclear program, it's only because the government in Tehran has given us no other choice. And I hope it doesn't come to that. And I'm well aware that in the short run, such an action may make things harder for the people of Iran.
Which is already very hard.
Yeah, no, I know. And this is why, listen, we hope and pray. We've seen so many changes in the world through the Arab Spring, where people who were so long suppressed have now asserted their rights and their freedom, and are beginning to enjoy the promise of a better life. In some sense, one of the antecedents, one of the origins of this was in the uprising in Iran after the elections, in my opinion, fraudulent elections in June of 2009, and the Green Movement. And I hope and pray that the Green Movement grows again, and it grows into giving the people of Iran the same kind of opportunity for a better life and a freer life that so many others in the region and the Arab world have taken for themselves over the last year and a half.
So as the last question, I wanted to ask you about the upcoming presidential election.
Yeah.
Even for Iran, it's a very important issue. The outcome either way could change the course in a very huge way. So during the previous elections, you endorsed John McCain.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you if you have come to the decision to endorse either of the candidates.
I have, which is that I'm not going to endorse either of the candidates.
You're not?
No. So, I've been a Democrat all my life. In 2006, I was denied the Democratic nomination in a primary, and I went on to be elected as an independent in Connecticut. I was very fortunate and grateful to the people of my state. Senator McCain is a good friend of mine, and I was proud to support him in 2008. But I've decided not to run for re-election. I've been 40 years in elective office, and I think I've had enough. And so, to tell you the truth, I'm so happy not to be involved in my own campaign, because American campaigns have become very, very divisive, that my judgment is that for the first time in my adult life, I'm going to enjoy the right that most every other American has to simply go in and vote in November in the privacy of the voting booth. And
no endorsement.
No endorsement.
We don't get anything from you.
No, I'd like to give you an exclusive, but no endorsement. I will say this is a very close election, hard to predict today. But in regard to Iran, I would say generally, though, the tenor, the tone of different statements may be slightly different. I think that there's a broad consensus among both major political parties in the United States and really among the American people about our policy toward Iran. In other words, I think the current policy has broad support among Republicans and Democrats, and more important than Republicans and Democrats, among the American people, including independents.
Senator Lieberman, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Great pleasure.
Thanks.
See you.